Reports coming out of ESPN have sent shockwaves through the league, and the Miami Dolphins are right in the center of it. A growing storm is forming around the future of head coach Mike McDaniel, and the questions only seem to get louder as the season pushes forward. According to insiders, the Dolphins' ownership, led by Stephen Ross, is beginning to evaluate every option, including potential replacements, as they prepare for a pivotal offseason. But before we dive any deeper into this breaking situation, let me say this clearly. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with your friends, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Alright, now let's get back to the story. ESPN recently published a detailed report featuring conversations from around the league. In it, insider Dan Graziano asked colleague Jeremy Fowler whether McDaniel still had a realistic chance to save his job. Fowler didn't sugarcoat anything. He explained that while the Dolphins have shown some life with back-to-back wins, the odds are still stacked against McDaniel. Players haven't tuned him out, which is rare when a message gets stale, but even with improved energy in the locker room, Fowler believes it's more likely than not that Miami decides to move on once the season ends. Graziano added his own perspective, reminding readers that McDaniel pulled off something similar last year. The Dolphins opened the season 2-6 before battling back to win 6 of their next 8, keeping their playoff hopes alive. To him, that resilience matters. It shows McDaniel can steady a shaky locker room when things get rough, something ownership will have to weigh carefully. Still, the biggest factor might not be Ross at all. The decision will likely fall into the hands of a new general manager, and that person may want a fresh start with a coach who shares their philosophy on roster building, culture, and long-term vision. Even if Ross personally prefers keeping McDaniel, he can't hire a GM and then block their most important football decision. Whoever is brought in must have full control, including the power to make a coaching change. So yes, the pressure is real. And despite a window of opportunity to turn things around, especially with upcoming matchups against the Jets and the Saints, the future remains uncertain. If the Dolphins claw their way back into the playoff hunt, McDaniel's case strengthens. If not, the franchise may be heading toward another major reset. Before we continue, answer this in the comments. Should the Dolphins fire Mike McDaniel after this season? Type Y for yes, or N for no. As for me, I still believe Miami may ultimately decide to move on, even though there are reasons to keep him another year, especially with Tua Tagovailoa remaining the centerpiece of the offense. The organization might determine that a new direction is necessary to finally reach the heights this fanbase has been waiting for. When you look ahead to next season, there's no doubt that the coach who has gotten the most out of Tua Tagovailoa is Mike McDaniel. His system fits Tua, and his creativity has helped unlock parts of the offense few others could. But even with that connection, the Dolphins must ask a difficult question. Is this as far as McDaniel can take them? Some fans argue that Miami should give him one more year, and if things unravel again, then make a clean break, move on from McDaniel, evaluate Tua's future, and start fresh with a new coach and possibly a new quarterback in 2027. On paper, that path makes sense, but there's a far harsher truth staring this franchise in the face. At some point, the Dolphins have to stop delaying the inevitable. We already know who Mike McDaniel is as a head coach. He beats struggling teams. He feasts on opponents who can't get out of their own way. But when Miami stands on the same field as playoff-caliber rosters, the results tell a painful story. Through 3.5 seasons, McDaniel owns just 4 wins against teams that held a winning record at kickoff. Against opponents at .500 or worse, he's 28-15. The pattern isn't new. It's who he is. Yes, the Dolphins finally broke their long drought against Buffalo a couple weeks back, beating the Bills for the first time since September 2022. It was a huge moment, but even then, it felt more like Buffalo having an off day than Miami proving anything. The Bills bounced back immediately with a dominant win over Tampa Bay, while Miami turned around and struggled against a Commanders team that has been one of the worst in football. This is why Dolphins fans can't get swept up in the recent mini-surge. Winning 3 out of 4 sounds impressive, but 2 of those victories came against the Falcons and the Commanders, teams that have been stumbling through the season. And even in those wins, the same frustrating issues showed up again and again. Look at the Commanders game alone. Miami faced unnecessary timeouts, procedural mistakes, and delays that stalled drives before they ever had a chance. The third and short timeout, the delay of game on 4th and inches, the puzzling pistol formation at the goal line, and the defensive timeouts near the end that arguably helped Washington during their final drive. If Matt Gay doesn't miss a 56-yarder, that game might have slipped away. These problems aren't new. They're part of the McDaniel experience. The same issues that contributed to collapses in 2022, 2023, and the shaky start in 2024, even with injuries accounted for. And now here in 2025, Miami has spent much of the year near the bottom of the league despite a roster built to win right now. That's the painful reality. The evidence isn't small. It's overwhelming. Even if the players are still fighting for him, and they absolutely are, effort doesn't erase years of the same mistakes. It doesn't remove the ceiling this team keeps crashing into. And it shouldn't convince anyone that beating a few struggling teams somehow makes McDaniel the long-term answer. Coming up next, we're going to look at several names that ESPN has already identified as potential replacements for McDaniel. Coaches around the NFL who could be on Miami's radar if a change is made. ESPN's report didn't just evaluate Mike McDaniel. It also revealed several names that could become serious contenders if the Dolphins decide to make a coaching change. And what stood out immediately was this. The top group of candidates are all defensive-minded leaders. Among the first names mentioned was Vance Joseph, someone we've talked about before. Then came Robert Saleh, the current Jets head coach who could be on the move depending on how their season ends. And, of course, Brian Flores, the former Dolphins head coach whose defensive reputation continues to command respect around the league. But the name gaining the most momentum lately is Jeff Hafley, Green Bay's defensive coordinator. His rise has been so dramatic that some Packers fans are openly wondering if he should replace Matt LaFleur as their own head coach. That's how quickly Hafley's stock has climbed, and Miami has definitely noticed. Beyond the defensive group, ESPN also listed several offensive-minded coaches who could be in the mix. Matt Nagy was included, though Dolphins fans would likely revolt if he became the next man in charge. Mike McCarthy and Cliff Kingsbury were also mentioned as potential options, both former head coaches now serving as offensive coordinators. Kingsbury's creativity is intriguing, but the fit is far from perfect. Arthur Smith and Joe Brady rounded out the list, though neither seems like a strong candidate to elevate Miami's roster to championship standards. But let's circle back to Vance Joseph, because his name is appearing more often than any other. ESPN highlighted him, NFL Network mentioned him, and insiders believe he could be a real contender if Miami goes in a defensive direction. Jeremy Fowler went as far as saying Joseph's defense in Denver might break the NFL single-season sack record, which speaks to the impact he's having right now. And there's another layer to this. Joseph has history with Miami. He served as the Dolphins' defensive coordinator back in 2016, and there's still a strong connection between him and ownership. Stephen Ross doesn't forget people who make an impression, and Joseph is absolutely someone he respects. After his time in Miami, Joseph became the head coach of the Denver Broncos for 2 years before eventually being let go. Denver moved on to Nathaniel Hackett, and Joseph went on to coordinate defenses in Arizona before reuniting with Sean Payton in Denver. His journey has been filled with ups and downs, but his defensive units consistently play fast, aggressive, and disciplined, traits Miami desperately needs. With all the uncertainty surrounding the Dolphins' future, one thing feels clear. If a coaching change happens, Vance Joseph will be near the top of the board. Miami is watching him closely, and the league is too. When Sean Payton returned to Denver as head coach, he convinced Vance Joseph to come back with him, something you almost never see in the NFL. It's extremely rare for a coach to be fired as a head coach, then return to the same franchise only a few years later to run the defense. That alone tells you everything about the kind of person Joseph is. He's someone who sets his ego aside, shows up, and works wherever he's needed. And honestly, many believe he shouldn't have been fired in Denver to begin with. His teams weren't great, but they weren't disasters either. 5 wins one year, 6 the next, far from the worst in the league. Local reporters have said for years that Joseph never got a fair shot. He didn't get to build his own coaching staff, didn't have control over personnel decisions, and never had the proper support system around him. In spite of all that, he kept his reputation intact. Then came his return to Denver's sidelines, and that's when everything changed. Joseph completely transformed a struggling Broncos defense. In his first season back in 2023, his unit finished near the bottom of the league. But once he installed his full system, added players who fit his scheme, and put his philosophy into place, Denver's defense exploded. Over the next 2 seasons, they became a top 5 unit, playing with speed, discipline, and relentless pressure. ESPN even reported that this year's Broncos defense might break the NFL's single-season sack record. That's how dominant they've become. Joseph has an exceptional eye for defensive talent. Look at the players he's helped elevate. Patrick Surtain too, Nick Bonitto, Alex Singleton, Riley Moss. The list keeps growing. Everywhere he goes, defensive players develop, improve, and thrive. And that's why so many people believe Joseph could lift Miami's defense into elite territory almost immediately. If he's paired with a strong general manager, someone who works with him from day one, the Dolphins could quickly become a top 10 defense year after year. The key would be hiring the right offensive coordinator, someone experienced and creative enough to keep Miami's offense sharp, while Joseph focuses on building a dominant defensive identity. With his network of coaching connections across the league, finding that offensive partner shouldn't be an issue. There's also the value of experience. Joseph has already been through the grind of being a head coach once. Those early years in Denver taught him lessons you simply can't learn any other way. Many coaches need that second opportunity to truly unlock their potential. The first attempt may not click, not because they lack skill, but because the environment wasn't right. You see stories like this all the time around the league. Look at Andy Reid. He had tremendous success in Philadelphia, but never captured a championship there. It wasn't until he started fresh with Kansas City, drafted Patrick Mahomes, built the roster his way, and grew with his quarterback, that he became a 3-time Super Bowl champion. Reid isn't comparable to Joseph in resume, but the message is the same. Sometimes the second chance is where everything finally comes together. And for the Dolphins, Vance Joseph might be that kind of second-chance success story. The debate in Miami is getting louder by the day. If the Dolphins decide to move on from Mike McDaniel, who should take the reins? It's a question that could reshape the future of the franchise. McDaniel is one of the sharpest offensive minds in the league. That's undeniable. His creativity in the run game and his ability to design explosive passing concepts are rare. But when the play calling stalls or the team drifts away from what works, the frustration becomes impossible to ignore. That's why, if a coaching change ever happens, Miami realistically won't find anyone more gifted on offense than him. The next hire would almost certainly come from the defensive side of the ball. That brings us to the real candidates. Robert Saleh stands out as one of the strongest options available, a leader who never got a fair shot in New York. Right behind him is Vance Joseph, who has rebuilt his reputation through resilience, leadership, and some of the most aggressive defensive play in football. And if Miami wants a fresh voice, names like Jesse Minter and Chris Shula are quietly gaining momentum as rising stars in the coaching world. If I had to rank them today, the list looks like this. 1. Robert Saleh 2. Vance Joseph 3. Mike McCarthy 4. Chris Shula 5. Jesse Minter, and that wraps up this section. With the Dolphins entering their bye week, a full mock draft breakdown is on the way, along with more critical updates as the story continues to unfold. Stay tuned. The next chapter of this season is going to be big.